So,
good afternoon.
Hi, Evie.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm quite excited. This is our first podcast.
I know. I'm very excited. We are recording on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon. The sun is finally shining, which is amazing.
It is shiny.
Which makes
shiny sun.
Lockdown feel just a little bit nicer, which is good.
So, what book are we going to read?
So, today we are going to be reading Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez.
Amazing.
Amazing book.
Yeah.
So I chose this book. I was actually given it by my mum for Christmas. I'd been eyeing it up and it had been on my list to kind of look at and read for a while. But as I'm so rubbish with books, never got round to it. And then my mum got it for me for Christmas, started reading it, and then instantly wanted to tell everyone that I spoke to about this book and tell them to read it, which is why this is our first book that we are recording.
And this took you how long to read?
2 months.
No, it didn't. You did. I remember you telling me, because I listened to this book on an audiobook while I was running. It took me a week. There's 9 hours. That is 9 hours of running. And I had to keep, actually much longer, because I kept stopping, because it's so good. There were so many amazing bits in it that I had to keep stopping to write notes so that we could talk about it on this podcast. But it is an incredible book.
Yeah, it is amazing. And it's kind of shocking, but also makes total sense. I think that's the best way to explain it. You kind of, as a woman, there are so many things in this book that I know irritate me in daily life, or I have thought about, but I just presumed that they were not real. Like, they were just irritating things. They weren't necessarily, like, for instance, driving a car. My legs are so short that I sit basically on top of the steering wheel. And it has popped into my mind so many times that if I crashed, I feel like the airbag would just crush my face because I'm so far forward. But I just assumed that the car would have been tested on someone having to sit that far forward because the seat goes that far. So you would assume that they would test it. But then just reading this book, you find out that actually they don't, because the position that I'm sitting in the car is abnormal.
And the facts are terrifying. What are the facts?
So women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured, and 17% in a car crash, and 17% more likely to die.
Which makes me think I don't want my niece to start learning how to drive. She's currently learning. I don't want her to drive.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying. Ridiculous. And they have introduced testing on female dummies, which are basically just scaled down male dummies. But the regulation around it in the EU only means that you have to test it in the passenger side. And as we know, women are allowed to drive now. So we are driving in cars, but we are not necessarily safe because they're not testing.
They're also not testing on pregnant women.
No, they're not, which is, I think, one of the major causes of fetal premature deaths is women in car accidents, which is slightly terrifying.
Absolutely awful.
Seatbelts also don't account for women having breasts, which is shocking. So we're wearing our seatbelts in the abnormal way, which I think is the major thing within the book. The current theme throughout it is that women are seen as abnormal in medical testing, in car design, in data analysis, or data collection and everything. We're seen as abnormal and we're seen as unpredictable.
Yeah, so that's the thing that really started you off on this, isn't it? That's what really, I remember you saying, this is terrible. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it just shocked me massively. I mean, maybe it's just me being oblivious to these things within the world, that most medical research is carried out on men. And I think one of the reasons that she talks about that they give for that is that the female body is so unpredictable. We have a menstrual cycle and all of these kinds of things. So, for instance, there's no research around the female immune system, which is mental and could be incredibly helpful, especially in something like what we're living through now in a pandemic, where you've got COVID that is affecting actually men more than women, but there's no data and there's no research around the female immune system, so they don't really understand why those differences are. But the incredible thing is that from all the research that is available, it shows that the differences in sex lie in tissue, in organs, in everything, in every part of our body. There are sex differences between us. So it just baffles me that they are not doing medical research on women.
But they're not just not doing research on women. The research they're doing research on men, but also research on male animals. They won't use female animals.
And
male cells. Yeah, that's insane.
Which is mad. It is. It's absolutely ridiculous.
But the reason why, again, because
we're unpredictable. Because
women are too unpredictable.
Yeah. And I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that the
crazy
men and the male body are seen as the norm. So they just assume that whatever works for a man will work for a woman. But it won't, because there are doses, like different doses affect women and men differently. Obviously, the actual medication will affect us all differently.
Yeah.
But like she even goes into one example of where they had the female Viagra and I assume they'd tested it on women, but when they
tested it on men, they never tested it on women.
They realised that it had, if you consumed it with alcohol, it had weird side effects. So then, quite rightly, they organised some more testing on it. But of 24 people that were involved in it, only 2 of them were women. And you kind of think,
how?
So this is female Viagra. It's not even common sense. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Female Viagra tested on mainly men.
Yeah. And I think the original actual male Viagra was...
that was an accident.
Yeah, it was by accident.
It was a happy accident.
But they were actually testing it on period symptoms.
That's right.
Yeah, and the pain and all of that kind of stuff that affects it.
The really shocking thing was the heart attack.
Oh my God.
It's
absolutely mental. Like, I didn't even know this. Like, so everyone, like, if you Google heart attack, most of the images that come up are of a man.
The Hollywood heart attack.
The Hollywood heart attack. And they're like clutching their chest. It's like the pains down the left-hand side. But actually, only 1 in 8 women get those symptoms. Normally, when a woman has a heart attack, it causes fatigue, nausea, and shortness of breath.
Yeah.
So many women are going into hospitals. It actually makes my skin crawl that this is happening, but it's not noted anywhere in medical books that are being taught to doctors. Mm-hmm. Like they are going into hospital, people are not recognising the symptoms, they're getting sent home, and then they die.
So hospitals and GPs aren't recognising the symptoms. Yeah. And this is something that we all need to know
because it's not taught.
Yeah. But it's the second, in the USA, it's the number 1 killer of women. And in the UK, I think after breast cancer, certainly after cancer, it's the second biggest killer. So it's something that everyone needs to know. And I didn't know this. You didn't know this.
No.
It's absurd.
It is absolutely absurd. And it's just quite scary. I think the amount of information that is in this book is incredible. Like the index alone, I think, is like 69 pages of all of the research that she's pulled together. It's incredible. Yeah. But it just goes to show there's all this research that's gone into it, but the fact that it's had to happen is quite disappointing. Like, yes, we have come a really long way. We have far more rights and equality now, but it kind of makes you feel like there's still so far to go. Mm-hmm. And if we don't start talking about it now, it will get worse and worse.
Yeah. What was the other massive takeaway from this book for you?
For me personally, I think it was the medical research that just like shocked me to my core.
Why isn't that a front page scandal though?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't honestly, I don't understand.
No.
Why is it no one talks about this?
It is crazy. And actually, one of the podcasts that I listened to after reading the book, History Becomes Her, which is a brilliant episode where they interview Caroline Criado Perez along with Tracy King.
Yeah.
And it's the interviewer is Rachel Thompson. But what Tracy King talks about is the fact that after she read this book, she started a GoFundMe page.
That's right.
To pay for every member of parliament to buy a copy of this book for them to read. Yeah, exactly. Because it is so important and because it is so shocking. I think there are so many things in it that you're just baffled by the fact that this is happening. And I think it is important that people, especially men, do start reading this book because it's really important for me to understand it as a woman, but even more so for people like MPs who are making decisions that affect women every single day.
Mostly male MPs.
Mostly male MPs, yeah. White, middle class male MPs.
Making decisions for women. Yeah,
exactly.
So I was listening to a podcast this morning, just before we recorded this, just so I'm sort of swatting up on some more facts. And there was I can't remember which MP it was, but it was an MP in the New Zealand Houses of Parliament who quoted directly from the book. So Caroline Criado Perez actually does make a difference. I mean, the research in her book is being shared around the world.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's being, this book, you can get this book all over the place, obviously, but the American edition is really interesting.
Really?
The podcast I was listening to earlier, she's being interviewed by this American, she's swearing like a trooper. I love her, she's great. But she's so passionate.
Yeah.
You have to listen to her. I mean, reading the book, it just made it so much, her reading the book to me.
Her brain is amazing.
Yeah,
the amount of information that she holds, like, I'm in awe of it, because I can't remember anything.
You try running while listening to her, it's almost impossible. She's quietly furious about everything, which is brilliant, and that's exactly what we need.
As you would be.
Yeah. No, it's just amazing. So compelling.
One of the things I forgot to talk about with the medical stuff. So there's a really interesting interview with her, podcast interview, the New Scientist one, which was recorded last year. And it obviously references the book, and going back into the medical side of it, she specifically talks about COVID and the fact that to start off with, when COVID hit, they weren't desegregating the data by sex. They weren't recording how it was impacting men and women. And actually she mentions a question time. I think there were 2 episodes of it over 2 nights with Matt Hancock. And he quoted the fact that like 4 doctors had died. And then someone pulled him up on the fact that they weren't even recording how many nurses were dying.
I know, that's absurd, yeah.
Which is mental. Like, I just don't understand why you wouldn't record that. Mm-hmm. And it just goes back to the fact that it's baffling why they are not collecting data. They're collecting all of this data, but they're not recording how it's impacting men and women. So you can't then go back and have a look at it and discover the differences between the sexes, because there are, obviously, we're completely different. So I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to. And it's particularly prevalent with COVID, because it is impacting men and women so differently. And actually men are more likely to die from it. And because there's no data on the female immune system, they don't know why it's not affecting women as much as it is affecting men.
Because they weren't testing.
Yeah. But what is shocking is that I think at the time of recording that podcast, she said that 60% of the people dying from COVID cases or contracting COVID were 60% men. But actually within the NHS, people contracting it was 65% women, which really shows the amount of women that are within the NHS, which I think is about 77% of all NHS staff are women.
Wow.
And that then comes on to what she talks about in the book is PPE. And the fact that PPE is created based on the male body.
That's right.
So when you get it's a small man. But what if you're a small woman? That's extra small.
Yeah.
And they're actually...
So it's not fitting. So it's not safe.
It's not fitting, yeah. So all of those nurses that are on the front line, yes, obviously there are male nurses, but predominantly they are female nurses. And as we know, nurses are the ones that are actually going in and doing a lot of the contact work rather than doctors. And they are on the front line, and they're getting in it. And their PPE doesn't fit, so their masks, their gloves, and it needs to, and it's not safe for the patients, and it's not safe for the staff, and it's just mental. Again, it's just ridiculous.
Which also reminds me of she talks about in the book. She talks about bulletproof vests.
Oh my God, yeah!
Explain that. Go on, tell us about that, because that's
so. Bulletproof vests are built as standard to fit men and women. But obviously women have breasts.
And they're not taken into account.
And they're not taken into account.
So the man who designed,
vest.
well, it had to be a man, it wouldn't be a woman. The man who designed them didn't think that people might actually have breast tissue.
You put it on, and for a woman that might have kind of fairly large breasts, which obviously does happen, the stab vests are then lifting up to expose their midriff.
It was any size breast. I mean, it's just...
Was it?
Yeah.
Even small ones?
Yeah, even small ones. Yeah, but I mean, if it's not flat, it's going to rise up at the bottom where you're going to be most susceptible to a bullet.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And there are actually, there are stab vests that are specifically made for women. So it's not like they don't exist. But actually there are a couple of cases, I think one of them was in New York, where a police officer, she bought her own stab vest.
It was a Spanish woman.
Oh, Spanish.
Yeah.
And she then ended up leaving.
No, she was fired.
She was fired?
She wouldn't, she out of her own money, she was paying for her own PPE to protect her from being shot or stabbed. And then, I think she was fired. I think she was fired. I mean, it was horrific. That shouldn't be happening anywhere, should it?
No. And when they did a survey of all the firefighters, doctors, police, only 5% of them, female ones, only 5% of them said that their PPE fit them, which is crazy. You've got people working on the front line that are being hindered because of their personal protective equipment, which is crazy because it's there to protect people, which seems very just ridiculous.
It is.
Yeah.
So the other thing I remember reading, you might remember this better than me, is that I had no idea about this. Women's skin is thinner than men's.
Yeah, I didn't either. I did not know that. But I mean...
It makes me feel so stupid, but you didn't know either.
No, I didn't.
Which means that, I mean, it's not funny. It means that chemicals, right? Toxicity of chemicals is tested on men. It's not tested on women. So, which means that if you're a woman working in a nail bar, or if you're a female cleaner, or any female that's in contact with chemicals, you're more likely to be injured by the chemical than you are a man in the same job.
Yeah, and those chemicals have been linked to things like breast cancer. So your risk of getting breast cancer is higher through your contact with those chemicals. And had they tested those chemicals on women at the start, then they would probably have to make them more diluted. Yeah. And less dangerous. And safer for the women that are actually using them.
This book's full of this kind of stuff, sort of stuff that I just can't understand how I've got to my age and not know this. It's just insane.
No, but I think that's ultimately the problem, isn't it? In society, is that the male body is default.
As normal.
Yeah. And the female body, or women in general, are seen as abnormal. Yeah. So everything is created as standard for men, and then we're like an offshot or a second thought.
So with that in mind, hold your iPhone up.
Okay.
Can you use your iPhone in one hand?
No, I can't. And actually, now every time I use my phone, I'm so much more aware of the fact that I can't use it one-handed.
So she talks about this in the book, doesn't she? So the iPhone is designed for the average man's hand. It's designed by a man.
And my hands are particularly small as well, which really does not help.
It's obviously not designed by a woman. It's designed by a man for a man, not for a woman. But actually, I was just Googling it just to double check our facts before we started talking about it. And iPhone have just brought out, apparently it's big news on the Apple website, 11% thinner, 15% smaller, and 16% lighter. So there's
which is great. Maybe they read this book.
So iPhone 12 mini.
Apple are listening. It's great.
but being lighter is really important because apparently the weight of the phone is causing skeletal injuries.
Yeah, I actually find if I'm on my phone too much, the side of my hand on my little finger side really hurts, and up my thumb as well. So I can't use my phone for too long, especially if I'm trying to watch something or hold it or scroll, as you do on Instagram or TikTok, which is ridiculous. So in some ways it's preventing me from using my phone for too long, but it is annoying because even when I try and take a photo, I can't hold it one-handed. I have to utilize two hands. And for someone that might not have the use of both hands, that it's unusable. That's ridiculous. Or if you've got one hand that you're holding a child, or you're carrying shopping, or you're doing anything, you can't then use your phone. Yeah. Because you can't use it one-handed.
It's crazy.
And which is crazy.
The other thing she talks about is the piano. Do you remember what
Yeah.
Tell me about that, because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, so pianos, again, the keys are designed for the male hand, which is obviously the span of it is much bigger. So most pianos are women can't use them as easily, and they're hand spread.
So in the book she talks about what a travesty it is that most female pianists can't reach their full potential because the keys are too big. Yeah. But there was a man who had a piano designed especially for
because he had smaller hands. So he designed a piano specifically for smaller hands, but it's not the norm. So when you're going in and you're using an in-house piano, it's not going to be the smaller keys piano, it's going to be the bigger key piano. So but just music in general, like, it's already harder for women. So when you look back through history and look at all of the composers and musicians and pianists and things like that, obviously women had less rights, so they weren't able to as freely create music. So not only have they got that barrier, they've got a piano that doesn't fit with their fingers. And actually in the book she talks about the fact that when they introduced blind auditioning in New York Symphony, I think it was, the amount of women increased massively. I mean, I can't remember the statistics that she goes into, but it just goes to show how much prejudice there is in terms of choosing musicians within an orchestra. It's crazy. So all of these different barriers mean that women are having to constantly fight the stereotype because they are not classed as the norm. And one thing that's really interesting, Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, which is a brilliant book, if you get a chance, she talks about how just having to fight a stereotype actually impacts.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting, and you are doing it subconsciously. So you're not even aware of the impact that it is having on your output. So in the 90s, they actually did an experiment where they were testing racial stereotypes and how that can affect intellectual ability. And they found that black participants performed worse than white participants when they were told that the test was a diagnostic test. But when they weren't, then they performed much better. So just having those stereotypes in your brain makes you think that you can't do it. There's also another similar test where people talk about the fact that girls aren't good at maths, which is obviously totally ridiculous. And in this experiment, it was a group of Asian women, and they were asked to take a mathematical test. And they found that when they highlighted the fact that they were women, they performed less well. So because they are recognising the fact that they are women, they are not performing as well as they would have done had you eradicated that
because
thought
there's this kind
completely.
of low level subconscious.
There's a subconscious stereotype that plays in our mind that means that we are now thinking it as well as other people
and believing it and behaving it.
It is.
I mean, it's awful, isn't it?
It's ridiculous.
So I've worked in an office with predominantly women, and I'd come in sweltering and they'd all be sat there in their cardigans. I mean, they had special cardigans on the back of their chair. It's not funny. It's not funny. No, but it is now when I realised. I just thought they were being silly.
I think
just wear more layers.
Ultimately, that is the running theme with this book, isn't it? I mean, there's so much information.
No, it's just such an eye-opener. It's such an eye-opener.
It is. And so let me ask you this then. As a man, what did you find most shocking about it that you just wouldn't have even thought about?
Okay, there are obvious things. So how heavy a door is.
Oh, yeah.
So the weight that is regarded as acceptable to open a door is based on a man opening a door, not a woman.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are some doors that I struggle to open, that you have to put your shoulder behind. But if you're...
And you'd think it should be the other way around, because men tend to be stronger, so are more likely to be able to open a door that's made for a woman, because then it would be lighter.
I don't understand that. And the other thing was glass staircases.
Glass stairs, yeah.
Obviously, I mean, you wouldn't do that if you're a female architect, would you? Or an interior designer, you wouldn't put glass stairs in. And then the biggest shocker, and I've seen it so many times, I've just not thought about it in the same way, that when you're on a tube, the amount of women that can't reach the
I mean, it's a daily struggle for me. Not right now because we're not travelling anywhere. No, right. But
to hold on to the safety belt, the hangy thing. What do we call the hangy thing?
Handrails.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the dangly things. All the handrails. Yeah. They're not. So
they're not dangly anymore, Pete. It's a bar now. That's like from the
bar.
Olden days.
Sorry, the olden days, the dangly things. Maybe on the Central Line.
And so let me ask you this as well. Obviously, it's well known that when you go to like a concert or something, and then you go to the toilet in the interval, the women's queue is always far longer than the men's. So before you, obviously, you know now that you've read it. Before that, why did you think that the women's queue was so much longer? Have you ever thought about it?
In theatres, I mean, I'm particularly noticing theatres just because it's so obvious because you're queuing down.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know. I guess probably because they don't have you don't have urinals.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about the other stuff that she talks about in the book, where women tend to have children with them, or they'll tend to have the elderly person who they have to help, or they have to check. They need to change sanitary products, or
they're wearing complicated clothes, like a jumpsuit,
or if they're pregnant, they're more likely to need to use a bathroom more often.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about any of that.
Yeah,
not just about urinals, but the square footage. This is the thing that just amazes me. The square footage that's given in most buildings is exactly the same for men and women. Yeah. And that's seen as fair.
It's regulation now. Yeah.
It's seen as fair, and that's just ridiculous because it should be completely different.
I mean, but you'd think that someone would have thought about that because you are putting urinals in there. So yes, they've made it equal in terms of floor space, but surely someone would look at it and go, oh yeah, there's 5 in the women's, but there's 9 in the men's. Like, you'd think that people would spot that. But
I'd like to know if female architects would do it
any differently.
I think they probably would.
Well, actually, one of the things that she goes into, slightly off track in terms of architecture, but is with refugee camps and temporary housing that they have created because of some natural disaster or pandemics or something like that. There's all of these cases where men have created temporary housing but haven't included kitchens.
Yeah.
Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, that's just mental. Or they're giving out food supplies in refugee camps, but they're not providing enough kitchenware to cook the food or wood and matches and all of that kind of stuff. They're not providing the instruments to then be able to cook, which again just baffles me, like why you would not think that. So one of the things that actually didn't come out of the book but came out of my research around the book, I watched a TED Talk.
Her TED
Talk, which is actually quite old, and we'll put it on the reference notes so that you can go and watch it. But one of the things she talks about is her campaign to get a female person added to the Bank of England banknotes. Yeah. So there was already one woman on it, and they were taking her off, and they weren't going to.
Florence Nightingale.
And they weren't going to put a woman back on.
Oh, but it's okay because apparently the I was listening to this earlier. Apparently the governor of the Bank of England said that's okay because you've got the Queen. You're covered.
Oh my God, Are you serious?
I think those were his exact words. Yeah, we're covered. You got the Queen.
But she said that she just thought it was an oversight, and she actually assumed that when she highlighted it, someone at the Bank of England would be like, sorry, let's rectify that.
No, we've got the Queen.
But they didn't. And not only that, so she managed to win that campaign, and they did add
Jane Austen. To the £20 note.
To the £10 note.
Is it? £10.
Yeah. But what I found incredible, and this is detailed in her first book, but she talks about the abuse that she got when she carried out that campaign.
She was trolled on Twitter. Which
is horrendous. It actually makes my skin crawl thinking about some of the things that they said to her.
Is that the TED Talk where she read them out?
Yeah, she read them out, and they were, I'm not going to repeat them because they are quite intense, but she had rape threats, death threats. And one of the running themes of it, the majority of this was from men, I believe, is that they didn't like the fact that she was talking. So a lot of it was centered around shut your mouth and that kind of language.
Yeah.
And it seems that there is still, obviously, a lot of men don't like the fact that women have an opinion and can talk. But it was so shocking to me, and she talks about how shocked she was, the amount of abuse that she got from people just by asking to have one woman on a banknote. Like, that just seems a bit crazy.
Get some perspective.
Exactly. Like
death threats,
rape threats. Yeah. Like, these men are being threatened. And there is a correlation between the increase of women's rights and the amount of violence against women as well.
See, this is interesting. Yeah, and really, really shocking. But I don't hang around with people that behave like... I mean, obviously I don't hang around with people that behave like that. But none of my male friends, none of my friends would have a problem with a woman speaking.
No.
So is that just... I that's why I'm so shocked. I mean, I know it happens because I know there are...
but I suppose you wouldn't necessarily experience it until you put something out to get that opinion from other people, because like you say, we're all in our own little bubble, and even on social media, all the algorithms and everything are centered around showing you things that you're interested in and showing you people that are like-minded, so you are not getting that experience of people having that opinion. And I obviously watched her TED talk. I just don't understand why people feel the need to be so aggressive to someone that is essentially is a victim, or someone that is just trying to get a woman added to the banknotes. Just one woman.
Oh, and the Queen.
Yeah,
because we're covered with the
Queen.
Two.
There's two women. But I just think that it is just crazy. And actually, she talks in the section on politics. And she says that as female representation in Parliament has increased, so has hostility towards female politicians, and particularly by their male colleagues.
Seriously?
Which is like, they're obviously threatened by the increase of women in Parliament taking over a predominantly male space.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
No, of course they don't.
No.
Well, tough. But I remember telling you, because I remember you telling me this, we were having this conversation right at the beginning when I first started listening to this book on my runs, and Diane Abbott gets death threats daily. And she's an MP up near me in North London, and I saw her in a garden centre, and I remember listening to this podcast, and she was talking about all these death threats she gets, and I was just thinking, I just want to go up to you, and I mean I didn't, because I wanted to be embarrassed, but I just wanted to say I think you're amazing, just being out here. I wouldn't leave the house.
No, I mean it's terrifying. Yeah. What is incredible, the research is particularly positive. So in this section in her book, she talks about the fact that when women are included in peace negotiations, they're 20% more likely to last at least 2 years. And then the countries where women are kept out of positions of power are less likely to be peaceful. I mean, all you need to do is look at the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And the countries that have fared the best out of this. New Zealand, Finland, Taiwan.
Yeah.
They're led by women. That's got to show you something. You need to have a balance. We're not saying that women need to be like taking over, but surely a 50-50 split, a balance in most areas of society could only be positive. I just don't see how it can be negative. But there are people that are obviously threatened by that and don't want that at all. Which is quite scary. But we need to be talking about it, and we need to be fighting it. And I think that's why Tracy King started that campaign to get a copy of the book for everyone in Parliament, because she knows that it's so important. And it is incredible to have an actual book where it covers so much of this information. And it all comes back to data, which is obviously what she's saying is, without the information, how are you going to make changes? We need to be sex desegregating data so that we can make informed decisions. And there's so much proof of when they have rolled things out or when they have made decisions without accurate data, they don't work or they fail. So countries are wasting money by not having this data and not making informed decisions. They're making decisions for women and women's lives for every day, and they're not basing it on anything. And the majority of people making these decisions are men. So how are they supposed to know? It's like with transport. They don't take into account that most women take public transport, whereas men tend to drive, and they don't account for the kind of in-travel journeys that women make. Women tend to do multiple trips. So they'll take the kids to school, and then they'll go to the supermarket, and then they'll go to work, and then they'll go and drop something off at a parent or someone that they're caring for. Then they'll go pick up the children, and then they'll go home. So they're making all of these multiple trips. But the people that are making most of the decisions for transport are men.
Trip chain, that's called, isn't
Trip
it?
chain, yes, that is it.
Whereas most men are going A to B because they're commuting.
They're just going A to B. They're mainly doing it in a car.
Yeah.
And actually there was an incident in Sweden
snow.
Snow, where so Sweden is actually, I think, one of the only countries where they are going through all of their policies and looking at whether they are equal. So this town
in the book she actually says they were just doing a bias survey.
Yeah.
Like you do.
Like you do.
Yeah.
Only
of course they do. Yeah.
And they looked at, and someone made an offhand comment about how you can't make snow a feminist issue.
Yeah.
So obviously someone went and looked at it and actually found that it was having an impact on women's lives, because when it snowed, they were clearing the roads first and then the sidewalks. But obviously,
because they thought, well, you're driving.
Most people are driving,
yeah.
But they're not.
You need clear roads.
Men mostly drive, whereas women will walk or take public transport
or push a pushchair,
which is incredibly difficult through snow. Exactly.
Snow.
So although clearing the sidewalks first had a very little impact on driving, it had a huge impact on people that are walking, so mainly women. And they found that there were less injuries,
in
and they actually saved millions of pounds in
healthcare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show that when you do take into account the data by sex, then you can impact on everyday life.
Yeah, it was an audit, not a survey.
An audit, it was.
A non-biased audit.
Yeah.
Would we do one here in this country? Probably not.
Probably not.
I would never have read this book unless we'd been doing this. I just wouldn't have read it.
Which is that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But
it's so good.
The last thing I would be doing is reading a book. I mean, now I'm really pleased I have, because I've read this thinking all the women in my life, my nieces and my godkids and my friends have just had a little girl. I mean, born last week. I'm reading this for her. I want to know this stuff so that we can do something with it. But what's your big takeaway? How's this made you better?
Well, it's quite scary, really, because, like I said, there are so many things that I think about every day that are kind of irritating things that don't quite work for me, like my car, I have to sit really far forward, and like my phone, not being able to use it one-handed. Just being aware that this is not just the fact that I'm small, particularly small for a woman, 5'3", tiny, tiny hands. It's about the fact that this is happening to all women, and it's a much bigger issue. And the things like not testing on women in medical trials, I just didn't know that was happening. So I would say that I'm a feminist, and I am aware of some of the impacts on women, but this book has just blown me away. Like, there's just so much information in it, and it actually just does shock me. So just having read it, and if I can get other people to read it, especially other men.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you've read it now, and one person, tick on my list. I think just knowing that information myself and trying to embody that information within my everyday. So for instance, at work, I'm trying really hard not to say guys as a general term for everyone.
I got that from here as well. Yeah.
It's not a big thing. Like, it's not going to make the world of difference, but it's just small. Just explain why. Small balance.
This is really
yeah. So she goes into it in more detail in the book, and she talks about language as a whole and how that impacts your go-to in your mind. So guys and the terms dudes and things like that is used as a general term for everyone.
Yeah.
But it is male specific. And it's actually, when they did tests on it, they found that people when you say guys and things like that,
you think man.
You do think man, and it's like using the term man.
She said that she does. Yeah.
So I'm trying to make small changes within myself that will hopefully impact the world in some way. And like I said, if I can get other people to read this book, I think that's like the first hurdle. And hopefully by having written this book, it will spill out into other areas within the world, and people will start taking this into consideration and making changes. So one of the things that she talks about on the New Scientist podcast is the fact that when COVID hit, they weren't sex desegregating the data. And when this woman emailed her local MP and said, can you please try and get them to start doing this? He was like, well, I haven't got time to have these conversations with you. I'm dealing with a pandemic. But it's just so important that becomes the norm, so that we do have that data and we do have that information. And I think the first hurdle is this book. The more people that read this, the more understanding you will have just in general. And even if you don't absorb every piece of information in the book, there's a lot. If you can just take away a handful of small things, that will have an impact on the wider world.
This book is so full of, the last third of it is...
Yeah, 69 pages it is.
Yeah, it's just endnotes and research. So knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. So just understand, like knowing this information, reading this book will give you an insight into what is happening in the wider world. And her research is diverse. It goes it's from every country within this world. So it's not like it's just the UK. We could literally talk about this book and the contents of this book for hours. But it is I urge everyone listening to go and read it, because it is incredible, or listen to it. If you want to listen to it as an audio book.
Well, you're running for 9 hours.
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of information. Yeah. And I have started listening to the audiobook as well, just so that I can absorb some more of it. And it is quite nice listening to her read it, because she's so passionate about it.
Yeah, I said furious earlier, but she's passionate. But yeah, she's cross, she's angry.
It riles you up.
Yeah, it does.
It does. And actually, she starts the book. I'm going to read it to you, because I feel like we should just all embody this. She says, for the women who persist, keep on being bloody difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's frustrating that you have to be seen as being difficult just to get equal rights, but, we do. And I love being difficult, so I'm going to embody that and take it into my life even more.
So thank you so much for making me read this book, because I wouldn't have read
welcome.
It. I just found it incredible and mind-blowing.
Yeah, I did too. And like I said, I thought I knew a lot about being a woman myself, but this just shows me the amount of information that I didn't know, and it is an incredible read, and I urge everyone to get a copy of it. And thank you so much for listening. We've really enjoyed it. This has been our first ever Be Better Library podcast. Yeah. It's very exciting.
It is. I feel like it's just you and I listening now, I don't know. Which is fine. We're doing this for
my
us.
mum's going to have a listen. It's going to be absolutely fine.
Auntie Sue might too.
We urge you, if you are going to buy this book, to try and buy from a local bookshop, which isn't open at the moment, but what you can do to get it from your local bookshop is go to bookshop.org, which is a brilliant website, an amazing initiative that was set up last year during the pandemic, actually over in New York, and has raised thousands of pounds for local bookshops. So it's actually, the books are actually sourced from locally. So obviously bookshops have been quite impacted, and we want to try and promote buying any books.
And you can find that really easily. Yeah. That'll be on our Instagram. Through them.
Yes, it'll all be on, all for our Instagram and our LinkedIn as well. So the alternative index that we've talked about,
the
Google Doc, that's all available on there as well. So if you want to have a watch of any of the videos, the TED Talk, or have a listen to the podcast, they're all listed on there. And
all our books and articles.
Exactly. So even if you don't read the book, watch the video, listen to the podcast, everything.
But you should read the book.
Small steps, but you should read the book.
Buy the book.
Read the book.
Thanks, Evie.
Thanks, Peter. Cheers.
Bye.